Elias Ward did not remember the forest being this quiet, not when he was young, not when Daniel was still alive. Black Hollow had always been a place of sound back then. Miners shouting in the distance, carts rolling down iron tracks, dogs barking near the old housing blocks. Even in winter, the town had a kind of rough, living noise to it, like machinery that refused to fully shut down. But now it felt sealed, like someone had covered the entire valley with thick glass and removed all air from inside it. Elias stood at the edge of the trees for a long time, holding the lantern without moving. The flame inside flickered slightly, even though there was no wind strong enough to justify it. That was the first thing he noticed. Something about the air felt wrong. He exhaled slowly. His breath came out in a thin white cloud and disappeared too quickly, as if the cold was swallowing it before it could fully exist. Behind him, Black Hollow remained silent. No morning activity, no movement, no life. Just a sleeping town under snow. And yet, Elias knew people were still there. He had seen lights in windows last night. He had seen shadows moving behind curtains. But nobody came outside. Nobody spoke. It was as if the entire town had agreed to pretend nothing was happening. Or worse, they were waiting for it. Elias tightened his grip on the lantern and finally stepped forward. The moment his boot crossed into the forest line, everything changed. The sound of the town vanished instantly. No wind, no distant creaks of wood, no faint echoes from building. Even his own footsteps felt muted, like the snow was absorbing not just sound, but intention. The forest was dense here. Old pine trees stretched upward, their branches heavy with frozen snow. Some of them bent unnaturally, as if they had grown under constant pressure. Elias moved slowly along the narrow path. He was not unfamiliar with this route. He had walked it before, years ago, when he was younger, when he and Daniel used to sneak out at night, pretending they were explorers, pretending Black Hollow was just the beginning of something bigger. Back then, the forest had felt alive in a different way, not comforting, but predictable. Now, it felt aware, as if it remembered him. After about 20 minutes of walking, Elias noticed something strange. The snow beneath his feet was not uniform. There were older tracks beneath the fresh layer. Footprints, human, recent. He stopped, lowered the lantern. The prints were not random. They followed a straight path deeper into the forest, moving toward the mountains. Someone had walked here, not long ago. Elias crouched slightly, examining them more closely. The stride was uneven, not running, not walking normally either, like someone who had been forced to keep moving despite exhaustion or fear. A cold sensation passed through his chest, because there was only one reason someone would come here alone and not come back: Daniel. Elias stood again slowly. The forest seemed darker now, even though it was still morning. He followed the footprints. The deeper he went, the more unnatural the silence became. Even the snow beneath the trees seemed different, compressed, heavy, almost too dense. Time became difficult to measure. Minutes stretched. The world narrowed. At some point, Elias stopped trusting direction and started trusting only the trail. Then he saw something between the trees, a mark carved into a trunk, fresh, deep scratches, like someone had dragged something sharp across the bark in panic. Elias raised the lantern. The light revealed more marks on nearby trees. Not random damage, patterns, repeated lines, symbols that looked almost like warnings, but not in any language he recognized. He felt something tighten in his stomach, and then a sound. Knock. Elias froze instantly. It came from somewhere below. Knock. Again, slower this time, rhythmic, like something striking stone from deep underground. The forest did not react. No birds, no animals, no disturbance. Only Elias and the sound beneath the earth. He slowly straightened. The footprints continued past the trees, toward a ridge ahead. He followed. The terrain began to slope downward after a while, leading into a natural depression between the mountains. Snow gathered more heavily here, forming deep drifts that slowed his movement. And then he saw metal. Old, rusted, half-buried in stone. A structure. A sign. Barely visible. Black Hollow Mining Company Shaft 9. Elias stopped completely. The entrance to the mine was partially collapsed, but still open enough for a person to enter. Cold air drifted out from inside. Not fresh mountain air, something older, heavier, like the breath of a place that had been sealed for a long time and was now remembering how to breathe again. The footprints led directly into it. Elias stared at the entrance for a long moment. Every instinct told him to turn back, but another feeling remained stronger. Daniel had come here, and something had brought him deeper. Elias raised the lantern and stepped inside. The moment Elias stepped inside Shaft 9, the world outside ceased to exist. It wasn't just darkness, it was absence, as if the mind did not simply block light and sound, but removed them entirely from memory. Behind him, the faint glow of the forest vanished within seconds. The entrance collapsed into a thin outline, then into nothing at all. Elias stopped for a moment. The lantern in his hand suddenly felt weaker, not physically, but perceptually, as if the darkness inside the mine was draining confidence from light itself. He exhaled slowly. The sound echoed strangely. Too long, too hollow. The mine responded to everything. Drip, drip. Water somewhere far above or below. Wood creaking under impossible pressure. And something else, a rhythm. Knock. Elias froze again, this time closer. Knock. Pause. Knock. It was not random, it was deliberate. He forced himself forward. The tunnel sloped downward almost immediately, narrowing into a rough passage carved directly into stone. Old wooden beams supported the ceiling, though many were cracked or warped with age. The air grew colder with each step. Not normal cold, deep cold, the kind that seems to come from inside the earth rather than the surface. Elias adjusted the lantern, sweeping light across the walls. Scratches appeared there. At first he thought they were mining marks, but they were too irregular, too frantic. Some lines were deep, gouged into stone with unnatural force. Others were faint, as if made with trembling hands. And then he saw something that made him stop completely. Writing. Not modern, not clean. Scratched directly into wood and stone in uneven bursts. Do not listen. Elias felt his throat tighten. He moved closer. Another line nearby. It learns through sound. His grip on the lantern tightened. The flame flickered. And then, knock. Much closer now. Elias turned sharply. Nothing behind him. Only darkness stretching into the tunnel he had just come from. He swallowed hard and continued forward. The passage widened slightly, revealing an old mining corridor where rails still ran along the ground. Rusted carts stood overturned, frozen in place as if abandoned mid-operation. Everything looked interrupted, not destroyed, stopped, suddenly, as if whatever had happened here did not allow time to continue normally. Elias stepped carefully between the rails. Then he noticed footprints again. But these were different. Too many, overlapping. Some moving forward, some returning, some circling in place. It looked like people had been lost here for a long time, moving without direction, repeatedly returning to the same points. A slow panic formed in his chest. He raised the lantern higher, and that was when he saw the first door. Not the mine entrance, but a reinforced metal door built directly into the rock wall, completely out of place, modern compared to everything else. Thick steel, industrial locks, warning symbols faded by age. Elias approached cautiously. The footprints led directly to it. He reached out and touched the surface. Cold, unnaturally cold. Then he noticed something scratched into the metal. Letters. Deep, uneven, as if carved with shaking hands. E-L-I. He stepped back instantly, his breath caught. For a moment, the mind felt smaller, tighter, like it had leaned in. Behind him, knock, louder now. The metal door trembled slightly. Elias turned slowly and saw something impossible. The lantern light no longer illuminated the tunnel behind him properly. Instead, something was blocking it. Figures, standing at the edge of visibility, not fully visible, only shapes, tall, thin, pale light outlining edges where faces should have been. They did not move. They did not breathe. They simply stood there, watching. Elias felt his body go rigid. Then one of them tilted its head, slowly, not humanly. And the knocking stopped. Complete silence. A silence so heavy it felt physical. Then, from the metal door, a single impact. Boom! The entire corridor shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Elias stumbled backward. The figures behind him did not react. They all turned, at the same time, toward the door. Boom! Another strike. Stronger. The metal bent slightly inward. And then, Elias understood something that made his blood run cold. The thing behind the door was not trying to get out. It was already awake, and it knew he was here. Boom! The third impact shook the entire mine violently. The lantern flickered. For a fraction of a second, Elias saw the writing on the door again. Not just his name, but more words underneath it. Fresh. He came back! Elias's breath stopped. The figures suddenly moved. Not toward him. Toward the door. Protecting it, or containing it, he couldn't tell. The metal screamed under pressure. And then, a crack formed. Thin, but real. Light spilled out. Not firelight, not natural light. Something colder. Something blue. And from inside the crack, a sound emerged. Not a knock this time. A whisper. Perfectly clear. Calling his name. Elias. The whisper did not fade. It lingered in the air like dust that refused to settle. Elias. He had heard his name before, in memory, in dreams, but never like this. Never from beneath a mountain that should not have been able to speak. The crack in the metal door widened slowly, as if something on the other side was deliberately testing the limits of the barrier. The blue light inside pulsed once, then again, like a heartbeat. Elias stumbled backward until his shoulders hit the rough stone wall behind him. His lantern shook violently in his hand, casting unstable shadows across the tunnel. The figures in the corridor had not moved, still watching, still silent. But now they stood closer than before, too close. One of them tilted its head again, and Elias realized something deeply unnatural. They were not looking at him. They were listening to the door, as if waiting for instructions. Boom! The metal structure behind him shook again. This time, the impact was not just physical. It carried sound, a deep resonance that traveled through stone, bone, and breath. Elias felt it in his teeth. The whisper returned. Not just his name now, a sentence. You brought him back. Elias froze. Daniel! His mind tried to reject it instantly. No, that was impossible. Daniel had vanished 23 years ago, dead, lost, buried in snow or stone, or nothing at all. The whisper returned. Not just his name now, a sentence. You brought him back. Elias froze. Daniel. His mind tried to reject it instantly. No, that was impossible. Daniel had vanished 23 years ago, dead, lost, buried in snow or stone, or nothing at all. But the voice did not feel like memory. It felt present, alive. The metal crack expanded further, and then something pressed against it from inside. A shape, slow. Testing. The entire chamber vibrated. Dust poured from the ceiling like ash. The pale figures suddenly reacted, all at once. They moved, not toward Elias, toward the door, forming a loose circle around it, protecting it, or containing it. Elias could not tell anymore. Then, a sound came from inside the crack, not knocking, not whispering, breathing, heavy, wet, ancient, something inhaling after a long sleep. Elias covered his mouth instinctively. The breath stopped. Silence returned. Then the voice spoke again. Closer now, clearer. Elias, you shouldn't have come down here. His knees weakened. That voice, it was not a monster. It was not the creatures. It was human, or at least it used to be. Daniel? Elias whispered before he could stop himself. A pause. Then, a soft, broken laugh came from behind the metal. You still say it like I'm gone. The crack widened again, and this time Elias saw more than light. He saw movement inside, shapes shifting in impossible depth, like a space larger than the mine itself existed beyond the door. The pale figures around him suddenly knelt, not in worship, not in fear, in alignment, like they were syncing themselves to something about to emerge. Elias stepped forward without realizing. No, he whispered, this isn't real. But the voice answered immediately. It's been real longer than you've known. The metal tore slightly. A piece broke inward, and something reached through. Not a hand exactly, too long, too thin, fingers that did not move like human fingers. The lantern light flickered violently, and in that flicker, Elias saw them properly for the first time. The beings, not standing, not human. Their bodies were not solid in the way flesh should be. They looked assembled from light and shadow, layered together, constantly shifting, never fully stable. But their faces were worse. Blank, smooth, like stone carved to imitate humanity, but abandoned halfway through the process. And yet they were watching him with intent, waiting. The hand from the door touched the ground outside, and the moment it did, the entire mine went silent. Even the dripping water stopped. Even the breath in Elias's lungs felt suspended. Then the voice returned, but changed, not coming from the door anymore, coming from everywhere. You remember the lights. Elias shook his head violently. No, I don't. You do, the voice interrupted gently. You just stopped believing them. The metal door shattered inward. A wave of cold blue light poured into the chamber, and something stepped through. At first, Elias thought it was a man, a silhouette, standing upright, familiar height, familiar posture. Then the light stabilized, and he saw Daniel Ward, or what remained of him. His face was the same, and not the same. Too still, too pale. Like someone had preserved the idea of him rather than the person. His eyes were open, but they did not reflect light. Instead, they absorbed it. Behind him, the mine beyond the door stretched infinitely downward. Not like tunnels, like layers, stacked worlds of stone and silence. Daniel looked at Elias and smiled faintly. "You followed me all the way down." Elias couldn't speak, couldn't breathe properly. "You were right," Daniel said softly. "There is something beneath Black Hollow." A pause. Then, "It just wasn't what we thought." The pale figures around them lowered their heads further, synchronizing. Daniel stepped forward slowly. The ground beneath him did not echo. There was no sound at all, only pressure, as if reality itself was adjusting to his presence. "You remember the first time we heard it?" Daniel continued. Elias shook his head again. "No," but the memory was already rising. A childhood night, 2 boys near the forest edge, a distant sound underground, a knock they both pretended not to hear. Daniel smiled. "You always covered your ears faster than I did." The mine shifted. Not physically, perceptually. Walls seemed further away, ceiling impossible to locate, space expanding in ways that should not exist underground. Daniel looked toward the crack in the door behind him. "It's awake now," he said quietly, "and it knows your name, too." Elias finally found his voice. "What is it?" Daniel paused, and for the first time, his expression changed. Not fear, not sadness, something closer to acceptance. "It's what the mine was built around," he said. A pause, then, "And it's been listening for a very long time." The knocking returned, but now it was everywhere, not from one place, from all directions at once. Boom, boom, boom. The mine itself was answering, and the pale figures began to move closer, slowly, surrounding them both. Daniel turned slightly toward Elias. His voice softened. "I tried to stop it," he said, "but the deeper you listen, the more it remembers you." The ground beneath Elias trembled. The blue light intensified, and somewhere deep below the mountain, something enormous shifted, awakening fully. The mountain did not collapse, it breathed. That was the first thing Elias understood as the sound rose from beneath him. Not destruction, not explosion, but something far more unnatural. A slow, deep inhalation that made the entire mine feel like it was becoming alive. Boom, boom, boom. The rhythmic knocking was gone now, replaced by a continuous pressure that pulsed through the stone like a heartbeat too large for the earth to contain. Daniel stood still in the center of the chamber, his expression no longer calm, now focused, as if he was listening to something Elias could not hear yet, but was about to. The pale figures around them tightened their circle, not attacking, not retreating, waiting. Elias stepped back instinctively. "This has to stop," he whispered. Daniel looked at him, and for the first time since appearing, his voice softened completely. "It already started a long time ago." A crack spread through the ground beneath them, not like rock breaking, like something opening an eye. The blue light from below intensified, flooding the chamber with a cold glow that erased all shadows. Elias felt weightless for a moment, like gravity itself was unsure whether it still applied here. Then he heard it, not a whisper this time, not Daniel, not the creatures, something beneath everything, a voice without direction, without body, but unmistakably aware. Eli! His name stretched across the chamber like it was being spoken through miles of stone. Daniel closed his eyes. For a second, he looked almost human again. "I told you not to listen," he said quietly. Eli shook his head. "You brought me here." Daniel did not deny it. Instead, he turned slightly toward the crack in the floor and spoke, not to Elias, not to the figures, to it. "It remembers him now." The response came immediately, a surge of sound that made the walls vibrate violently. The mine began to shift again, this time physically. Rocks loosened, metal twisted. The entire structure groaned like a dying organism. And then, the ground split open. A vertical fracture tore through the chamber floor. Below it was not earth, not stone, but endless depth. A vast, impossible hollow stretching downward far beyond natural limits. And within it, lights. Hundreds, thousands, floating, moving, alive. Not individual beings, but a collective presence. A system of awareness spread through the mountain itself. Elias staggered backward. "This isn't a mine," he whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. "No." A pause. The mine was just the entrance. The lights below began rising, slowly, like something ascending from sleep. The pale figures around Elias turned toward them completely now, and for the first time he saw their purpose clearly. They were not guards. They were fragments, broken interpretations of whatever existed below. Echoes, incomplete versions of something too large to fully manifest on the surface. The lights rose closer, and with them came sound again. Not knocking, not breathing. Memories. Elias suddenly felt images flooding his mind. Not his own, others. Miners underground, voices speaking in fear. Men whispering about something beneath the rock that responded when spoken to. Daniel's voice cut through it. "Elias, don't think about it." But it was too late. The entity was no longer just below. It was inside perception. The lights stopped just beneath the fracture, and for a moment, everything paused. Absolute silence. Then the voice returned. Not loud, not angry, curious. "You returned." Elias felt his legs weaken. Daniel stepped forward slightly. "You remember him," Daniel said. A pause. Then the voice answered, "Yes." The word spread through the chamber like cold air. Elias suddenly understood something horrifying. It had not been waiting for Daniel. It had been waiting for lineage, for continuity, for someone who would come back. The silence broke, and the fracture widened further. Daniel turned toward Elias one last time, and for the first time, he looked tired. Not possessed, not changed, just tired. "I stayed because it wouldn't let me leave," he said quietly. "It doesn't want bodies. It wants awareness." Elias shook his head. "No, I can still get you out." Daniel gave a faint, almost sad smile. "There is no out anymore." The lights surged upward. The chamber began collapsing, but not downward, upward, as if the mountain itself was reversing direction. Daniel stepped back toward the fracture, slowly, voluntarily. Elias reached forward. "Daniel, don't!" But Daniel stopped him with a small gesture. Not fear, not warning, acceptance. "I finally understand it," Daniel said softly. "It doesn't take people. It replaces what they refuse to listen to." The lights rose higher, now surrounding Daniel, and for a moment, Elias saw it clearly. Not Daniel disappearing, but Daniel becoming part of something larger, his outline dissolving into the blue light like ink in water. Elias screamed his name, but there was no sound anymore, only the entity listening, always listening. Daniel looked at him one last time and whispered, "Don't forget what you heard." Then he was gone. The fracture sealed instantly. The chamber fell silent. The pale figures collapsed like empty shells, fading into dust. The mine stabilized, as if nothing had ever happened. Elias stood alone. The lantern flickered weakly. And somewhere far beneath the mountain, the voice remained, not speaking now, just waiting. Elias slowly turned and began walking toward the surface. Days later, Black Hollow was empty. No residents, no lights, no movement. Only snow covering streets that no longer led anywhere meaningful. The mine entrance was sealed, naturally, as if the mountain had decided to close itself again. But Elias never spoke about what he saw, because there was one thing he understood clearly now. The worst part was not what lived beneath Black Hollow. It was the fact that it had been listening long before anyone ever noticed. And sometimes, late at night, if you stand in the right place near the old forest, you can still hear it. Not knocking, not whispering, just remembering your name.